It's Ward Green here, November 24th, 2021, and I believe it's time to give an update on the, I mean, I'd really love to do it. I haven't been able to do it up till now, for the main reason being I've been busy, but the other more predominant reason, more important reason why I couldn't do it was because the status of the analog tapes was not certain, or it was not yet digitized. The baking and the digitization had not yet been completed, and I wanted to. This is really about the baking. This particular update, or this video, this short, hopefully short video, will be my attempt to summarize what is involved in baking audio tape, which has been damaged by moisture. And it's damaged just by being at the ambient temperature in a room. Even if it's air conditioned, it doesn't matter. Even if you've got a low humidity in the room, I believe it will still occur. This humidity damage will occur because the tape soaks up the humidity. But first of all, we should say which tapes. Okay, the only tapes that I had that were concerned with this, they were all my tapes essentially, except for my cassette tapes, which were Super Avalon. That does not have any problem with moisture, but the Grandmaster, Ampex Grandmaster, or 456, and 406, which is not the Grandmaster, but those two Ampex tapes, 456 and 406, all of those tapes suffered from this moisture problem. And the reason why was because I found out there's a technical reason why, and that is when Ampex selected the particles that they would use for the oxide coating. If I recall correctly, and this may not be the whole story, of course, but when they selected these particles, they selected a nominal specification, but there was not a rigid definition of the particle size, and so there was, because of the variation in the oxide particle size, some of the particles being the wrong size, without going into any more detail, because for one thing, I don't have it fresh in my mind. But because the particle size was variable, the tapes that were formulated from that oxide became moisture prone, or prone to moisture absorption, and this is what caused the problems with all the Ampex 456 and 406 of a certain time period. Only a certain time period would be affected too, but it was the time period in which I was working and buying tapes, and that's why. And now, part of the reason why I should mention another thing about my studio. Part of the reason why I stopped working with the tape machine was because the tapes cost $150 each. So that was one reason why I stopped. And then when I got my digital, somewhere around after 2004, or around 2004, no, it was around 2004, because there's a song that's been made in 2004. So when I got my ES10 Yamaha motif synthesizer workstation, which has a 16-track studio built into it, really, a 16-track recorder built into it, and it has effects built into it. It's almost like a studio in one keyboard. That ES8, did I say ES10? I hope not. I don't even know if such a thing exists. The ES8 that I was using, after the tapes went astray on me, or after they became too expensive, whatever happened. There are many factors involved in why the tape recording was stopped. One of which, it had nothing to do with my wife, because she was healthy at that time. I mean, she was very healthy enough to do all kinds of gardening work, and she was a really hard worker. But, I mean, she had her health problems, as we later on discovered more clearly, like the problems with her skin and so on, that she was going to see the doctor about without my knowledge of why she was going to the doctor specifically. But, I mean, she was, to all outward appearances, she was exceedingly healthy up until she got even over the age of 80 years old. She was still very, very strong. Still, well, I mean, after 80, she became, you know, somewhat less strong, I would say. But I think, I mean, you could just notice it when we traveled around. You know, at the age of 80, she's a little more frail, or not quite as, you know, young or strong. But anyway, but I mean, she was really strong up until the last few years. I mean, still very active up until the last few years, which would be from her age of 88, you know. Even at that age, she was still very active. There was no... So health problems can creep up or arise very quickly. It can come up very quickly on you as you get older. You have to be very... I believe we have to be diligent in pursuing the prevention of problems. And one thing about that has to do with avoiding the use of drugs, but I wouldn't even start on that topic today, so we're just going to leave that alone for now. But I've talked about that before. It's just, but it's not only that. What we want to pursue a proactive nutritional regime, you know. But let's get back to the tapes. I mean, there's so much to nutrition, though. It's got to do with exercise, you know, breathing, you know, and fasting, as I later and recently learned. But the audio tape, okay, so there are other tapes besides Ampex that would have this issue, but the Ampex 456 and 406 definitely have it. So if you have tapes from, in my case, the tapes are from the late 1980s and on into the early 1990s. Those are the tapes. That's when I purchased the tapes, generally. Maybe even later in the 1990s, but maybe even beyond that. But I'm not even sure when I stopped purchasing the tapes. So you'd have to look that up. You'd have to look into that yourself in terms of which tapes are affected by this problem. But you would know whether they're affected because you would have tapes that would be too sticky to run through the machine. But you have to be very careful when you don't want to actually try playing one of these tapes. You could damage either the machine, but more likely the tape, and lose all your audio data if you strip the oxide off. So you don't want to even try this without doing your research first. So, having said that, once you decide you need to bake a tape, because you've done your research, you find out it's got the problem, you probably would want to try one of these tapes in the machine, but you don't want to use your best song or your most valuable stretch of tape or anything like that. You want to use a piece of junk tape or your test tone section or something that's not absolutely crucial to your audio life, you know, your audio record or your audio project. So let's talk about the baking. Once you decide you do want to bake your tapes, and I talked to Richard Hess, who's a very leading authority in Canada and around the world too on the subject, but he happens to be in Canada, and I got some what really amounted to the best advice about the baking, which was that the longer you bake these tapes, mind you, you have to, okay, first of all, we have to control the temperature when we bake them. That's crucial. So for that purpose, but longer baking is better. This is what Richard Hess conveyed to me, and I greatly appreciate that. Thank you, Richard. Many, many times. I can't thank you enough because I think that greatly benefited me. And I want to say, so I mean, I owe you big, if I had any money, you know. But of course, I spent my money on the digital equipment that I'm using to that I did use to digitize. So, another thing is all the digitization work on the baked tapes. I'll talk about that, but I can say right now that as far as I'm aware, that's all done. Everything is done. I'll come back to that. But the baking process, it was Ampex recommends only something like 8 hours or 16 hours, I forget the numbers, for baking at a specific temperature, which is 129 degrees Fahrenheit, 54 degrees Celsius. Now, if you bake a tape I bake some tapes for the recommended amount. My allergies are good, but I have a little bit of allergy right at the moment. It's making my nose itchy, but I mean, I want to blow my nose, sneeze a bit maybe. But I think my allergies is absolutely fantastic this year. The itching and so on. And I think it's because of my fasting. I did another short fast. I've been doing a couple of, in the past week, I've done a couple of 36-hour fasts, as well as, you know, in the past I've done some 2-day, at least one 3-day fast and a 5-day fast. And what it did for my allergies was incredible. It really eliminated my allergies. My ragweed, which is the worst allergy that I've ever had to deal with. Anyway, let's get back to the baking. So you can actually bake the tapes at 129 Fahrenheit or a little lower. So some people prefer to go lower, but I tried to keep mine at 129 or 54 Celsius, 129 Fahrenheit. But how do you know? I mean, it's done. If you have an oven that you can exactly control the temperature, which is a scientific oven or something, you could use that. Excuse me. But I don't have that. And I would not use a regular oven, because the thermostat on the regular oven is not accurate enough, and you could easily ruin your tapes. So I wouldn't do that unless you really know what you're doing. But even then, I would not do it, okay? Because it's just too problematic. But you can use a regular food dehydrator, that's big enough to hold the size of tapes you're using. My 1-inch tapes are 10.5-inch reels with a large hub. I forget the size of the hub, 3.5-inch maybe. It's a big hub. But the 10.5-inch reels with a large hub, the hub size is irrelevant. It's just the size of the tape has to fit into the dehydrator, but they just happen to be a large hub reel because they're so heavy. They need a larger hub to provide the torque, you know, the strength needed to turn these giant tapes. They're 1-inch. Now my tapes are not the highest. The tape itself is not the highest form factor, because 16 tracks on 1 inch is you know, if you divide by 4, you get a 1/4 inch. You'd have 4 tracks per 1/4 inch. That's worse, or a greater number of tracks, a worse width, a smaller track width than a 1/4 inch stereo, which is my mastering medium that I was using. But that mastering medium was on a much less expensive Tascam stereo deck, which could only handle 7-inch reels with the small hub. And I realized, I mean, I just think probably it's because you're bouncing onto another tape. It has the quality of that may have been good enough. I'm not sure, but I think it's a combination of the fact you're bouncing it down onto another tape instead of keeping it on your original. I mean, the quality is going to suffer loss, and just by transferring it to another tape, which also, because each tape has its own frequency losses, and each electronics system has its own frequency issues or losses, and it also has wow and flutter in the mechanism that is magnified because the two machines have to play at the same time when transferring. So the wow and flutter can be magnified, or it can go up and down because of the two machines playing at the same time. It's just a mess. And it just ends up sounding degraded. It doesn't necessarily sound like it has an identifiable problem, but you may just notice it sounds worse. Anyway, my quarter-inch tapes were usable, but I found out by doing the actual digitization of the original 1-inch large reels directly from 16 tracks onto 16 digital tracks using my 8+8 PreSonus plus the PreSonus 1824C plus the Behringer ADA 8200 together, using the Behringer as the master at 44.1 kilohertz. That's how I did the digitization. Only after the baking, though. Okay, so but I was able to use that, and the PreSonus had the computer interface over USB 2.0. Plenty fast enough for this job. Way fast enough. I mean, easy. As I talked about on my other tape, on my I think it was the update for September 14th, 2020. That update talked about, I believe that was the one, talked about why, yeah, that was the one I think. I talked about why USB 2.0 is plenty of bandwidth for this job, for any audio. You don't need USB 3 or anything. And I explained the bandwidth idea there, but I come in detail. But the baking itself, how do you measure the temperature? That's what I should come to now. If you've got a dehydrator, you can do this job, but you need a thermometer, a way to measure the temperature so you can actually keep tweaking that temperature to get it at 129. And the way to do it is the way the thing I used was a digital laser thermometer. Just shines a laser. It's $14 was all I paid for this thermometer on Amazon. $14, made in China. Amazing price, amazing device. I mean, a lot of things in China are pretty fantastic. I just, I pray they're not all using child labor, but their labor is so cheap in China anyway. But I mean, they build amazing devices, and I mean, it's just like when China first started building things, we used to kind of laugh about it because, so cheap. Everything made in China was cheap. Used to be, but that used to be the case for Japan. Years ago, we used to say the exact thing about Japan. If something said made in Japan, we would just laugh because it meant it was junk, basically. But it wasn't too long before the things made in Japan were the best in the world. And that continues up till now, when now the things made in China are starting to become the best in the world, where we were laughing at them for a few years. So made in China. This $14 laser thermometer I've never had a laser thermometer before, but this is just incredible how well it works. So I'm just shine it into the dehydrator. I take the cover off while it's running, and I can shine the laser in it on different points inside like if I shine it on the back of the dehydrator where the heat source is, it'll be higher temperature. But I can shine it on the sides of or the back of the dehydrator, the bottom of it, or shine it on the tapes or the paper tape that is surrounding the tape, or shine it on the reel surface, anything. I could shine it on the wood blocks that are spacers in between the tapes. I spaced each tape with a square block of that big of 3/4 inch plywood, and stacked them up. I had four tapes in each batch that I baked of 1-inch tapes, and so I did 4 batches. I think I thought I had, that would imply I had 16 tapes, but I think I did. Did I do? I may have done. No, my last batch was. That's right. I did my last batch was just in October. That was my last, and that was batch number 4, I believe. But I know from what I wrote down, if I've recorded them all, I know that I have 13 1-inch tapes. So I don't think I have 16 of them. But the number of songs would be about. They're not all different songs. Some are the same song done again. But each tape is 33 minutes. I think it's 2,500 feet, running at and it does run at 15 inches per second. Oh yeah, another thing, very, very important thing. For anyone recording on audio tape, anybody who wants to achieve quality without getting into the complexity and the expensive proposition of noise reduction. What I did, I didn't want to buy the noise reduction, and I think I absolutely stand by that 1,000% fully committed still to that idea. Not to buy noise reduction, because you don't know if the noise reduction will prove to be good in the long run, or if you can maintain the calibration on playback or anything. You just don't know, right? It's just an added complexity. So what do you do? And what I did is what I'm going to tell you. But what do you do, to get noise reduction without having Dolby or without having any kind of noise reduction built in, or without buying the unit that they sell you? What I did was, somebody must have told me this somewhere, and what you need to do, or what you can do, doesn't cost you much, or you just have to have some kind of a parametric equalizer. You could use a graphic equalizer, but I had my board, my M520, that's what the camera's standing on right now. It's the M520 Tascam audio board. It's an analog board. Now it's very antiquated, but still working, and some people still using them all around the world. And I mean, mine needs a bit of refurbishing if I were wanting to use it. I think one of the meters went dead. Yeah, one of the VU meters is dead. I can see it right now. The thing is on. Why have I got the board on? That should be off. I'm going to turn that off. There's no sense having this board on. It doesn't make any sense. Okay. Oh, wait a minute. No, it's not. No, it's not. I don't get it. I don't think it's on. No, I think it's not on, because I just found the power switch and it was off. But I think it's just the light shining from the overhead lights. It made it look like some of them were on. But I think one of the VU meters is burned out. I recall that it was. But there's some work. I mean, the light is burnt out. That's all. The bulb, but. There'd be some work to do on this board to get it in perfect working condition, but it still has a lot of functionality if I wanted to use it. But it's just, why? Because I've got this new digital studio. These two pieces of equipment, the 8 channels each, they're a digital studio in and of themselves, together with the software, which was Studio One Artist that came with it, version 5. The PreSonus Studio One Artist, Studio One 5 Artist, is the best software I've ever used for mastering, let alone for digitization, at which it's also perfectly capable. But I mean, it's spectacular software, and initially I had some real problems getting used to how to save, where to save, which directory, how to control which directory and folder it was saving things to, and I had some problems with it at the beginning, and understanding how to get it to record files. I think one time I couldn't get it to record anything because one of the, or I couldn't get it to play back because I was using, I forget why, whether it was because the Behringer unit was turned off and I was trying to play back 16 tracks. I mean, you don't need those on, but it was using the Behringer as the master. I think that was what was happening. It thought the Behringer was the master and it was turned off. I mean, but there can be a million reasons why software doesn't work when you're using audio equipment. It's so complex. But these are just initial headaches it's just the learning curve. Okay, it was just the learning curve. Once I got past the learning curve, and I still have some of the issues, of course, with the same, relearning the same things, or, I mean, new things are still going to be, I still need, there's still more I need to learn. But in general, I can use it, it's easy to use it now, totally easy. And it's fantastic software, it's very intuitive, and I can do anything with all kinds of plugins, which I get for free online. All kinds of free downloads online that are just plenty good enough mainly for reverb and stuff. You need to download stuff to get some reverbs that you can use. But there's some that come with it that are probably more than adequate, I think, too. But I did download a few other ones, like Ori River, I think is one. I think that's one. Something like that name. What else? No, there's a couple. There's a few. I don't have it running. I'm not going to talk about that. The baking. Let's stick to the baking. So here's the facts. If you can keep the temperature in your dehydrator at 129 Fahrenheit, and it's never going to be exactly that, but somewhere in that area. And no, let's say less than 129, 129 or less, the temperature of the tapes, never more than 129. Once you've got that, you can let the thing run for like 100 days or whatever. I was doing it for 3 months. I did it from batch 1 was from October something until January something. It was from October something, whatever the date was, to January 4th. The next baking was from January 4th or later. Maybe it was the 6th. I don't know. I don't know when I started the second baking, but it went till April 11th. So that's like February, March, April, 3 months, but February has fewer days in it. So whenever it was there were about 90 days for each of these baking periods. 3 months of baking, and then it went from April 11th to July 8th, and then July, somewhere around July 8th until October. Sometime in October, I went a little beyond on the last baking. I was busy with other things. I let it keep baking, and I knew by then that it doesn't matter how long you bake it for. It's not going to hurt it as long as you keep on, I didn't even have to check the temperature because I knew it was okay. But I mean, occasionally I did check the temperature just if I had any doubt. I could see that it was still at under 129 Fahrenheit, and that's going to be fine. So for the Ampex 456 and 406 tapes, and these are the 1-inch tapes I'm talking about now. So after I baked them, I then had the digitization process to do. So the digitization equipment was purchased sometime in 2020, around September 14th, when I did that update, was when they arrived. And it was right on that day, I think, that they arrived. That's when I did that video. That's why I did the video. But the MS-16 itself is I wanted to say this too. Even though 1-inch format, which I talked about, is not as good as 1/4-inch half-track, but 8 or 16-track, if it were 8 tracks 1-inch, that would be as good in terms of a format. But I wanted exactly what I had, 16-track 1-inch format, because sometimes I use 12 tracks, or sometimes I use quite a few tracks. Other times I'm not using as many, but like I might only use 2 tracks sometimes, or maybe one, like possibly only one if you're only recording a solo, acoustic guitar voice together for a song. But if you want to add any other tracks, you've got 16 tracks. So I had that format because it was the one that I wanted. Now, having said that, it's inferior in terms of the format itself, the form factor. It's inferior to 1/4-inch half-track, but my 1/4-inch machine was not anything close to the top of the line or the best of the best. But on the other hand, the MS-16 is the exact opposite of that. I mean, even though they're both made by Tascam, the 1-inch tape is of an incredibly high standard. Really, really excellent electronics, and really good transport system. Everything was really good until it started to go on me, because it needs maintenance. I never did have time to maintain it or have the inclination for whatever reason. Well, digital was coming very strong at the time when I bought this machine. Digital was starting really to get strong very soon after that, and everybody was abandoning analog tape, so it wasn't really, there was no incentive to maintain this machine either. But and I eventually bought the ES10. But this 1-inch machine was able to make very high quality audio recordings on the 1-inch, what I would call very high quality. And it's a semi-pro machine, but really the quality is really really on the low end of, it's professional, but I mean, it's more professional than it's more professional than consumer, that's for sure. It's very professional quality on this machine, although I've not used anything better, so I don't know if it's just how good it is. I don't know, but I can tell. Well, I mean, the only way that anyone else can understand how good it is by hearing the remixes, the digital remastering using the digitized tracks, which I've got from the PreSonus 1824C and the ADA, the Behringer ADA 8200 that were used to do the digitization of the 16 tracks simultaneously. And, or however many tracks were present, they were all done simultaneously. And so all the tapes were digitized. So the digitization has been done. The quality of this machine, it does have the capability, it does produce a balanced output too. It has balanced outputs on it. And I used the balanced outputs for the device that could handle that. I think that was the PreSonus that could handle the balanced outputs. No, sorry, I mean, I meant to say the Behringer. I think it was the Behringer that could handle the level of the balanced outputs and without introducing a risk of any distortion. And I thought there was a slight risk of the PreSonus. Well, I mean, the specs, it showed there was a risk that the PreSonus couldn't handle the full level of the signal, of the balanced signal, so I used the unbalanced for the PreSonus, which is okay because it's just the noise floor. Well, I want to come back to the noise floor. Yeah, because I talked about noise reduction. I need to talk about that at some more length to explain this. But the real reason I can talk about any of this is because the work has been done. So the important reason why I can even discuss it and why I want to discuss it and let people understand it so they can be benefited by it as well themselves if they are in a similar situation. The reason I can do this video is because I've completed that digitization and I've got copies, now I should make sure I need to get a copy that's not on my premises maybe to enable, or I don't know where I can store it off my premises, but maybe even if I put it in a waterproof box and put it in a hole in the ground, that would be better than nothing. One of the copies, because I mean the digital copies, because if I don't protect against a fire or something destroying everything, then it's lost. All of that. And the other thing I can do that I need to do is urgently is to master these songs and get them uploaded to the internet so that they'll be forever preserved that way. If something happens at my end, if anything happens to my property. But so I mean, that's another piece of advice that I would be inclined to advise people with regard to is that protection of the original copies. But anyway, somehow to try and protect them. I haven't yet determined what I want to do about that, but I'll be thinking about that now that I've mentioned it. So these digital copies, I mean, I've just got multiple copies, many copies of my digital, the original tracks digitized. So they're now on the computer. So having done that, I can now talk about it. But I mean, I still have to do all the mixing because they're still in danger, but not in the same danger they were in before. And well, if I did lose all of my digital copies too, I'd still have the original analog tapes to go back and bake them again if they need it, and run them through again and digitize it again. That could still be done again. So that's another thing that that Richard Hess mentioned, and I believe is going to be possible, is to rebake or to redo the digitization, even when they don't need rebaking. Of course, you could. Oh yes, another thing. Well, now the tape machine is breaking down. The 1-inch tape machine is breaking down over. It's been deteriorating is the word I'm looking for. And when I was doing the digitization or trying to do it, I burned out the fast forward motor. So I then, in order to do any fast forwarding, I had to What did I have to do? Let me see. Well, I mean, normally all the tapes are stored tails out, so I could just load it on the right-hand reel, rewind it, and then play it. So it's no issue. I don't need the fast forward. Once I'm done playing the whole tape, it's back on the right-hand reel, and I'm done. So it tails out again, and I just put it away. Now, one of my songs was stored front end out, and so the front end out tape, I needed to do fast forwarding if I wanted to get that, or how was that? Let me think. Yeah. Well, wait a minute. Let's see. Or I forget. I'm trying to picture it. If it's tails out, that means, yeah, that would be the front end of that tape. Yeah, the front end is out. So I could just, in that case, I had to put the tape on the left-hand reel and play it, right? And then, but for some reason I was using fast forward, and I can't remember why. I don't know. I don't remember why I was using. I should never have been using the fast forward motor anyway. And it should never have burned out anyway, because the machine wouldn't normally burn out just by using it for fast forwarding tapes, unless the fact that the tapes were stickier could have caused it to burn out. But I don't think that was the issue. I think the machine is just getting older, and I burned out the motor. And I smelled something, so I didn't, I could smell the burning, so I just turned it off, unplugged it, waited a while, and eventually I came back to it, and at that point I was only using the rewind, because I didn't want to try anything more, because I still hadn't completed my digitization. So I ended up being able to complete the digitization using just the play and the rewind. And the other thing was, I didn't rewind ever through the capstans or any of the. It didn't go over the heads or the capstans or anything during the rewind process. It went directly from reel to reel, and I just held the lever manually, the lever that normally tells it that the tape is wound or mounted. The tape is whatever that word might be, threaded, right? There's a lever that one of the rollers that the tape goes around is spring loaded to tell you that the tape is threaded, and that allows it to rewind. That allows the functioning of the play and the rewind button. So I did not thread the tape. I just ran it directly from the reel to the take-up reel, straight over, without anything in between. And then I manually held the roller lever that told it was threaded when actually it wasn't. But it just activated the motors. Then I did the rewind, and I was very careful not to rewind too fast. I didn't, so I held that lever at the right tension to let it feed at a reasonable speed. And this tape machine is so good, it even has a spooling or an edit button. If you press the rewind button twice, the second time it starts to flash, and that means it's rewinding at a slower speed. So sometimes I was able to get it to go into that mode because I wasn't using the threading, so I wasn't threading the tape, so I'm not sure if that edit mode should even have been working or why it didn't work, but it didn't always work. But either by pressing the edit or getting it to go into edit mode by pressing the button twice, or by varying my pressure on that roller lever on the right-hand side of the machine that activates the motors, I was able to vary the speed of the rewind so it wouldn't go too fast, and I could do everything I needed to do. Which was all I was trying to do was rewind once and play all the way through, and I was done for each tape. So that was the digitization process as well. So I mean the baking was absolutely crucial. And after I baked each tape, I put a silicone gel pack, which is it silicone? What is it called? Those things. Silica. No, it's not silicon. It's not silicone, which are both. They're two. Silicon is separate from silicone. They're separate, totally different things. But silica is another thing, and that's the dehydrating gel packs. So I had silica gel packs. I put 3 silica gel packs in each of my 1-inch tape boxes after I baked them, and I mean, I didn't do that obviously before I digitized. After I digitized them, I put them I closed the box up with the tape in it and with 3 of these silica gel packs, and I sealed it all in a plastic bag with a twist tie. A little white garbage bag that fit, was about the right size, that were on sale at the grocery. So, but I'm trying to preserve this dehydrated state of the tape as long as I can by doing that. But when I open them up later, I notice that these little gel packs have changed color, which means they're now expired, or they now need to be dehydrated themselves. You can take the silica gel packs and put them in the dehydrator and dry them out again and reuse them. So these are a great little thing you can get, a great little product you can get from Amazon for dehydrating, in this case audio tapes, but dehydrating anything. So I bought enough of them to do all my tapes that I've used it in the, not inside the boxes, but inside the bags of the 1/4-inch tapes. But the 1-inch tape boxes are big enough to put the gel packs right inside the box. So I put 3 of them in each box. And that was how I did that. So it was, I mean, now, most people, it's not common knowledge how to do the dehydrating, and that's why I'm mentioning it. Partly to help people who need to do it for their own salvage of their own audio. And when I learned about it, I was completely ignorant at the time I learned. I had no knowledge of what was going on. At first I thought my tape machine I really did believe my tape machine was broken because it wouldn't play the tapes properly. It was squealing or something. The tape would gets sticky, and then there's a squealing noise and that's if you try to rewind it fast forward, or you should never do that. Never rewind or fast forward or even play if you're not actually digitizing something. These older tapes that are damaged by moisture, never play them through never thread them through, and never play them or rewind them or fast forward them through your tape machine mechanism. Don't do that at all. Just itchy. Don't risk your machine or your tapes at all in that way once they've been damaged. So, and even after you've dried them out using the dehydrator or whatever controlled temperature environment you can use. I personally think it's better to not ever play those tapes other than while you're digitizing it, and you only play it through once to do the digitization. I don't want to play it twice and find that my machine breaks down because it's an older machine and I don't get to finish the other tapes that I've got. So I was very cautious about this whole process, and that's why I couldn't speak about it, because if I spoke about it prematurely, I could, and then I lost, or if then the machine broke down and I had to do a very expensive repair, I might never get where I was trying to get, which was to digitize these tapes. By diverting some of my energy into talking about it prematurely, that would have been a very unwise thing to do. And it's also true. Also true of the same thing is true of in many parts, many aspects of life. It's better not to attempt to change the world, if that means that it jeopardizes your own or completely incapacitates your own ability, to function, because you're too involved in the world, which is a bad thing, obviously. As the Bible says, don't be loving the things in the world, and don't be using the world to the full. I think that's 1 Corinthians 7:31. Don't be using the world to the full. Somewhere in Corinthians. But I mean, it's really a dangerous place to be in the world, and the more you expose yourself to being involved in the world, the more you're endangered by adopting the attitudes of the world without realizing it, such as the world's attitudes with regard to, healthcare, or, I mean, it becomes. Oh, and that reminds me of something. I don't usually get to talk about this, but blood tests. People mention blood tests. It came up recently, and see, the Bible says not to use blood. It's very clear about that. We're not to use blood. It's not just about eating the blood. It's not to use the blood for anything, it says. We're not to use it for fertilizer. So why would we be supposedly allowed to use it for, to be using it for, the purpose of diagnosis? I mean, that would be certainly a use. It would be a definite use. So I'm not sure why anybody would interpret the Bible as allowing the blood to be used in that way. Now, I know that the problem with me saying that is that it sounds like I'm abandoning technology, or I'm abandoning modern, medicine and so on. However, without understanding, I don't think anybody knows why the Bible says not to use blood. That's not the point. I think the point is, what are the benefits of listening to that advice? And one of the benefits is, it's automatic. One of the benefits is that the diagnosis required to treat disease becomes much it becomes much more critical. You have to learn more about diagnosis. You have to be better at it. It causes diagnosis skills to go way up. You become much better diagnostician. Is that the word? Diagnostician. With regard to figuring, the thing is, you can decide all sorts of things about disease if you study it with enough intent, with enough intensity, with enough determination, and when you put all your reliance on something like a blood test, which it can also be misleading. We know when you might detect certain nutrients in the blood, means nothing about the concentration of nutrients in the body. With regard to whichever it is, both cellular fluids. In the cellular fluids between the cells and inside the cells, it doesn't tell you anything about the concentrations of nutrients in those places. So it's very misleading. So, I mean, there are many reasons, but these are just human. That's just a human line of reasoning. It's not an attempt to justify the, denial of permission to do blood tests. I mean, that is solely based on what the Bible says about not using blood. That's the only basis for saying not to use blood, or not to do blood tests. So that was what I wanted to say about blood tests. But I mean, like I said, even though we don't know the reason why the Bible says that, exactly why it said, we can reason on it and come up with some ideas why it might benefit us to not do blood testing. One of which, or some other reasons, might be because the Bible says the life is in the blood. So if you're going to use the blood for something else, you've now taken your life and given it away. You've diverted it. Part of your life is diverted into this test. And if you now use that test for something, which I don't think that anyone can do continually, like nobody can continue to do things. You can't. A doctor. It's not logical that a doctor can treat a patient against the patient's will. I mean, there's no doctor that can keep on doing that forever. A doctor can't continually. So if you deny permission, the doctor sooner or later will cease to be able to continue to go down his line of treatment, attempting to treat you against your will. So all you can do is deny the treatment, and that's all you can do. And say, just, you can do it quite politely, just to say that be clear that you're not giving your permission. That's all you need to do. And if the doctor insists, as long as you're still clear, the doctor knows what your position is. As long as the doctor still knows your position, then the doctor's not going to be able to continue down that path for very long before he realizes that that's not his job to treat you against your will. His job is to treat you according to your will. And if he can't do that, then he doesn't have any business being your doctor. It's that simple. And now I know there are many doctors who won't agree with that, and that's because there are also there are many patients who aren't logical or reasonable, or reasoning even, or reasonable, for another matter. But I mean, there are patients who aren't well educated, but even if they're not well educated, they still should be given free will. But if a doctor knows or believes that the patient's life is in danger because of their choices and their lack of knowledge, then it's very easy to understand why a doctor might feel the need to treat that patient against their will in order to save their life, and that the patient would later be extremely grateful. So it's understandable that this situation can arise many, many times in the practice of medicine, where a doctor feels obligated to treat the patient against their will. But it's just that the patient who is knowledgeable should be aware that there's no doctor who can keep on treating a patient against his will once the doctor understands that that patient is in fact knowledgeable and does know exactly what is the reason and why they've chosen that, or that the patient is completely at peace with their own decision. And I mean, and we can be at peace with whatever decision the doctor makes too. But we can be clear that we don't agree with that decision. So there shouldn't be an issue with that. We're not responsible for what other people do to us against our will, in other words. So that was the issue of blood tests I wanted to talk about. I think it's a very important issue. But there's a lot more that could be done talking about what we might reason with regard to why or why not we should do, about blood tests. But that's too big of a topic for this particular video, and it's something that requires a lot more attention to it, which I recently haven't been giving to it because I've been so busy we're always busy with something, and we're not always looking at one and analyzing one particular. We're not analyzing everything specifically every day, so that's not a thing I've been giving attention to recently. But that was as concise, I think, a description of or an analysis of it that I could possibly give up to my current level of knowledge today. But we continue. But knowledge, we're not going to learn more about God's will from human reasoning. We're going to learn more about God's will from reasoning on scriptures. So that's where the changes in understanding might come. But the scripture is very clear about the use of blood. It says, don't do it, don't use it, because the life is in the blood. And if you don't use blood for anything other than internally in your body to give you life, then your life becomes much fuller, because it's your life's not diverted, or your blood's not diverted. It's not being used other than for the fullness of your own life. I think that enables your own life, our own lives, whoever of us is obeying that, to be absolutely the fullest that they can possibly be. And that, to me, is the logic behind the human logic. To me, that's what the human logic is, in my view. And it seems to be God's view, from what I can ascertain, from the Bible, Jehovah, his word. So, it's been 54 minutes since I started. I've talked about the baking. I think it's not important to most people, because most people don't have any baking that they need to do to any audio tapes. And this will not apply, I don't believe, it applies to cassette tapes in general, but there may be some cassette tapes to which it does apply, but I'm not aware of any right now. I'm not thinking of any. But it's not just Ampex tapes, though. In general, there are other reel-to-reel tapes which will suffer from something like this. And what the temperatures are for those tapes, I don't know. What you need to bake them at, they would be specific, possibly different temperatures. And maybe different lengths of time to bake them and all sorts of, there could be other things. So I don't know anything about that. I'm just only concerned with my own work at the moment. For now, that's all I've been doing is, I assume that's all I will ever be doing is my own work, minding my own business, like it says also in the scriptures about minding our own business. I've been busy with my own tape salvage, audio tape remastering, and the salvation of those tapes, or the salvage of those tapes for the purpose of remastering. Now, the remastering is going to be onerous work. Many of these songs, I realized just recently, have never been properly mastered. And the reason is because mastering is excessively difficult. That's another thing I should mention in the last few minutes of this video. Mastering is a complex, exceedingly complex process, because it requires the engineer who's doing the mastering to listen on multiple devices, like speakers, but earpods, different audio devices that can output devices that can give him the exact or overall, a wide spectrum of devices that can give him what the whole world would be hearing when they're listening to these songs, or whatever it is, but in this case, songs. So as the mastering engineer, have to use. I logically have to start with the best possible. In this case, I use the earpods for the initial mix. They give me a really good reference point for exactly how hot the signal is. Oh, I never got to talk about the hot. Oh, the noise reduction. Yeah, I never got to talk about that. Because you don't have noise reduction. This is great that I thought of this before I ended this tape. I can probably explain this quickly. Noise reduction, because you don't buy noise reduction, you don't want to pay for noise reduction when you buy an expensive tape deck, because noise reduction for the future might later on need recalibrating and all sorts of things. But if you don't want to pay for that, you don't need it, because you can record, every signal you record can be recorded hot. Okay, and what that means is you just need a parametric equalizer somewhere in the 4K, 5K range, or maybe 3K, I don't know, somewhere. But a parametric equalizer that you want to boost all the frequencies in the mid and high range. That's recording it hot. But now the main thing probably is the high range. You don't want to have it. It's probably better if it's not only parametric, but it would be better if you could boost a shelf type in an upward sweep, so you're boosting the high frequencies. So as you go higher, you're sending in more of that signal. The music signal should be higher volume as the frequencies get higher. And if you do that, it would be this way. If you're looking at, where is it? Yeah. If you're looking at me, the high end of the spectrum is usually on this side. So you want, as the frequency goes up, you want the signal volume or magnitude, strength to go up. The level of the signal should go up with frequency. Or whatever, anything at all in the mid to high range, if you boost it, then later on when you cut that, depending on what equalizer you have available, you want to boost all of the highs, including a few of the mids. If you do that, when you're recording, you boost it. That means it's hot. So every track is hot. When you play it back, it's going to hurt your ears, but you can cut that frequency on the playback. So you do the opposite on playback. When you cut the frequency of the music, you're going to be able to control exactly how it sounds. If there's any losses in the high frequencies, you'll be able to get them back by boosting it back up a bit. But all the noise that was caused by the tape itself will be lost when you cut the frequencies in the high range, because all tape hiss is high range. All the hiss is the high range. So you'll be able to cut that high range tape hiss and eliminate it completely on playback when you cut the high and mid frequencies using the same equalizer, the same parametric or whatever you've got equalizer, but turned the opposite way to cut the frequencies. So that eliminates tape hiss. But I'm not finished talking about this. As far as the mixing goes, I got a few more minutes as we just approach and just exceed 1 hour. I think, having said that, it's possible to do a lot with a tape machine without any noise reduction by using hot signals and playing them back and cutting the high frequencies on playback. That's how you eliminate hiss. Okay, there's no tape hiss. Most of my recordings, there's no tape hiss at all. I mean, in some cases, I've noticed there was some hiss introduced by my reverbs on the digital mix down. I mean, the mix master, the mastering sessions. That's caused by the frequencies that I boosted in the reverb section, or what, you know, it's caused by the digital reverb. They can be eliminated by adjusting that. But the other thing that's important, though, when you're remastering these things, I just thought of something else. Now I forgot what it is. It just came up into my mind as I was talking about this mastering process. You want to be able to. Oh yeah, I know what it is. The absolute most important thing when you're recording music is never record any reverb on your tracks. Never record any reverb onto the tape. That is the most important thing I can say about recording. And the reason is because there's no need to record any reverb. You can have it playing in your ears. The reverb you can send your signal to the tape dry with no reverb, and that's what you should do always, in my opinion, but I think it's the only way to do it, because later on you can then change the idea of how to do the reverb. You can't change it if you've done it. It's much harder to change it's impossible to my mind. And there's no way you can ever get back the dry signal again once you've added reverb to it. So record it dry, always. But while you're recording it, you can be sending some of that signal to a reverb and hearing it in your ears. So you can hear the reverb while you're playing. You can have all the beautiful reverbs you want as long as you're recording the signal dry, so the tape signal has no reverb on it. That's easy because you just have an auxiliary send. You send it to the auxiliary bus and it's just tapping part of the signal and sending it to a reverb, but the main signal is just going straight to tape and you don't put reverb on it. So then when you're doing the mastering, you can use all the most modern reverbs that are available today that 30 years ago I didn't have. I'm using them today to do my mastering. And they make the job 1,000 times, 1,000,000 times easier. But like I said, however, you know, digital mastering or any mastering is incredibly difficult. It's not because of lack of reverbs or any other thing like that. It's because of the complexities of composing a mix and enabling each track to be audible and properly adjusted in terms of frequency, and it's extremely complex, and there's usually no way to know where to start or how to start in doing a mix unless you have, and even if you have a lot of experience, you still have no idea where to start. But having experience, of course, teaches you that it doesn't matter where you start, just that you have to start. That's the thing you realize about life in general, I think is true. But there's some things you don't ever want to start, like we've already talked about. But some things that you do want to start, the important thing is that you have to start. In order to make any progress, you have to take the first step. And one of them is audio mastering. And there's a great technique I learned from somebody. There were several techniques about reverb that I learned, and they're separate. There's a couple about reverb anyway. One is you on the signal that you send, when you send the signal to the reverb, after it gets to the reverb on the digital reverb, you put an equalizer there, a frequency. What's it called? It's EQ, equalizer. I use Pro EQ, which is the one that came with PreSonus, with Studio One. The Pro EQ equalizer, whatever equalizer you have, you use that and roll off and eliminate all the frequencies below 500 hertz and all the frequencies above 10K, or I heard my brother uses 5K, anything above 5K. So, you can have so in between 500 and 5 or 10K, that's the only part of the spectrum you want to have used by the reverb. So in the reverb unit itself, you EQ it that way. And then in the center of that, somebody who worked at Abbey Road mentioned that he uses a deep notch in the middle of that. So he cuts out a very narrow notch of frequency in the middle of that bump that is allowed through. So there's even some of that that's not allowed through, in other words. But that is what the reverb is using. So it doesn't clutter up the mix with a lot of high frequency sounds, which sounds sort of chit in the reverb, and the low frequencies booming, too much booming in the low end frequency, in the low frequencies for the reverb, that just muddies up the mix. So that's reverb. The second thing about reverb, and the other thing about mixing that somebody told me, hopefully I'll remember that to talk about that. But the other thing about reverb is you send the main signal, each send that you're sending to the reverb, you can send from all your different channels to the same reverb if you want. Each one can be sent at a different level, but using that send level, you can put a compressor also on the reverb channel. Can have a compressor that comes after that equalizer and after the reverb part of it. After the reverb section, you have a compressor, and the compressor is set with a side chain access. The side chain is coming from every signal that's being sent to the reverb is going to the side chain, to the compressor, and telling it, if you boost that side chain higher, it compresses it more. And you can set the others, you can set the threshold lower so it will compress more. You can have a make-up volume, which boosts back up again after what you've done the compression. You can boost up the output of the compressor using the make-up knob. You've got your other two knobs are the onset and the release, the trigger and the release of the reverb. How fast it comes into the signal when the signal arrives, how fast the reverb comes up, and the release is how quickly it goes away, or how slowly it goes away. So you can control all those things in the compressor. That's the compressor. And the side chain, you just boost the side chain. The more you boost the side chain means that the louder the signal is, like the voice, let's say, if I'm singing louder, the side chain will be more signal coming through the side chain of the compressor. In the reverb itself and that would compress. If it's set properly, then it has a significant effect. You can set it up to have a small effect or a large effect, depending on these other controls. That side chain it can be set to eliminate the reverb when I'm singing loudly, and that prevents muddying up of the other instruments while I'm singing loudly, since you can hear my voice, and the other instruments may have reverb on them, and that reverb is perfectly enough. I don't need reverb on my voice to add to that. So that prevents this problem of too much reverb, but from too many sources. And then when the voice level dies down, that's less side chain signal coming in, so the compressor then releases. And when it releases, the volume goes up again, so that the tail end of my singing will have reverb on it. So if there's no other instruments present and my voice tails off, or if the other instruments are playing quietly, you'll hear that reverb on my voice. So it'll sound like my voice echoes in a room or in a chamber, in whatever space that the reverb is designed to simulate. So that's the way that works with the compression of the side chain compression of reverb. The other thing I learned that's very valuable for mixing is every channel. You shouldn't work on one channel for too long. Continue to change between. So I might start with a mix. I'm at 1 hour and 9 minutes. I'm going to try and get this finished very shortly, but it's whatever it is, however long it takes. If we've got 16 or 4 channels, 8 channels, 16 channels, whatever we've got, like for example, I might start with the drums. I might say I want to get the drums sounding roughly what I want initially. So I've got the drum track or tracks of drums. So I might add the reverb to that and equalization for those tracks to get the drum sounding the way I want. The snare drum should probably probably usually I want some specific type of snare sound, and the bass drum, I want it to be a certain level or style, a certain timbre or whatever. A frequency spectrum for each of the drum instruments could be, played with all the parametric equalizers. In Studio One, for example, has multiple parametric equalizers. So even just that is even if you don't have separate drum tracks for each drum, you might have one drum track with all the drums in it, or just a bass snare, which is like a rhythm. A drum machine track that I've often used that as my rhythm guide for a song, but there are other cases where I did something else. But whatever you've got, you want to make you might start with the drums, and you probably want the drum. You're going to have to do it sooner or later. So you either start with the drums and then you raise your other main instruments and your vocal and so on, and you adjust the equalizations of those, but one at a time. You take one at a time. So when you hear the initial sound of it, it might sound like there's no vocal, so you have to raise the vocal, so that's the first thing you do. Then you might say, well, if the drums start out sounding okay, you might not do that first. If all things are equal, you might start with the drums, you might not, but you're going to have to come back to the drums. The point is you're going to have to keep going through all the different instruments, adjusting them, and then every time one thing changes, it changes everything else. That's the reality. And if I boost or cut, if I cut the bass on a vocal or any instrument, if I cut out the bass, even if all I've done is cut the bass and not change the volume of the instrument or of the track, it sounds like all of a sudden that track just had all the treble boosted. That's what it sounds like, and I don't know why that is. I think it's like the same idea with how the brain works with colors. If one color is near to another color, it totally changes the perception of that color based on the relativity of the other color. The relative difference between the colors completely changes the brain's perception. So that seems to be true in audio too. So I've been learning more and more about it, but only doing it a relatively small amount compared to somebody who does it for their whole life. But if you control, the frequency, the EQ of a track, you're going to have to then adjust. If you want to cut the bass on the vocal, just the vocal, you want it to sound like there's no bass because you don't want to have that bass of the vocal interfering with the bass track or with the guitar or some other instrument, piano or whatever it is, or the drums. If you don't want interference, then you cutting is better than boosting usually with EQ. Usually better to cut. But if you cut, not always, but just for the sake of this discussion, if you cut some of the bass from one track, like your vocal, you're going to have to then adjust the treble of that vocal because it won't sound right. So everything you do makes a big difference with equalization, and then you're going to have to then adjust all the other tracks will change in how they sound relative to the vocal. So everything will have to be adjusted. We have to do them one at a time, and you do the one that you think is the most important first, and then you keep on going on to the next one, but each step that you take hopefully makes you feel a great deal of joy about how much better it sounds. That's the idea behind mastering, I think. I believe that really helps. If every step you take really makes a big difference in how positive you feel about it, then you're more likely to keep doing it. And it gets more and more exciting as you do it. The more you work at it, the better it gets, the better it sounds, and the more you want to do it. But the only danger in that is you might work too hard. You need to take breaks too. But taking a break is not a good idea when you're mixing. That's the problem, because it isn't a good idea. It doesn't really, unless you're going to take a break to listen to that track, like if you mix it down and then bring it somewhere to listen to it on a different set of speakers, that might be a useful break. But there's no reason. You have to do that anyway at the end. You're going to have to listen to it on all your speakers sooner or later. It's better to get the mix done. Learn what the process is to get the mix done. Then listen to it on all your different media or platforms, like your iPads and whatever you're going to listen to it on. Make sure that well, hopefully they will all sound perfect, but they're not going to usually, initially, until you learn your system. Like if some engineers only use one set of speakers and they learn how everything sounds based on how it sounds on that one set. I've got my reference monitors in the studio here, and they're excellent speakers. They're accurate, but they don't tell me anything about how it sounds on an iPad. I have no way of knowing. Now, if I were to do it enough, maybe I could learn how to use these reference speakers to tell me how it sounds on an iPad by just knowing what it should sound like on these speakers for it to sound like that on the iPad. But I don't think that that's realistic, and I don't think it's likely that that's ever going to happen, because these speakers are so different from an iPad. I don't think they just have a different frequency response entirely. I don't think that it can ever tell me that. That's partly why I use earpods as my main. It's not my reference, but it's my main starting mix. So my starting point for all my mixes right now is my earpods. Then I will go also to my much less trebly, much less tinny, or much less. These are not tinny earpods; they're excellent earpods, but a much lower content in high frequencies in my studio headphones. They're right there. That's it. They're right there. Yeah, Audio Technica. They're just good quality studio headphones. They're not the best. They're certainly not the worst. They're good headphones, but they don't have the content that the earpods have in the high frequencies. And I want my songs every time I want them to sound just as good on the earpods as they sound on those headphones, and it can be done. It definitely can be done, but it's not what you think initially. You have to just go until you achieve it, and then but I don't attempt initially to achieve that. I get something that's roughly fairly accurate on both, or close, somewhere in the ballpark on both of them, and then I'll put it on the reference speakers. Or I might go from the earpods to the reference speakers first, even. I'll do that. Earpods, and then my studio reference speakers, which are 12-inch woofers, and a three-way, whatever that is, three-way crossover with the mid and the tweeter. And it's got a little bass port there too. They're JBL 4412s, studio monitors. So that, I think I'm starting to use that as the studio monitor as my second reference, my real reference, but it's my second, it's my reference. And then the earpods are first, so the reference is my reference, my second. And then if that sounds, perfect, then I'll, which it never does, but if it did, I would go to my headphones, make sure that that's right. And usually that wouldn't be right, even if this were sounding good enough. But when you get all three sounding good, you're close. That's something close to what you want. Right? Very close usually, but not always, because sometimes you might think it's perfect on these three, and then when I go to the iPad, I think it's perfect until I get to the iPad, and then I say, well, that's not right. So there's something, the iPad for one thing, it's got a little speaker out the side, and there's no high frequency content unless you put your hand behind it. But I want it to sound good even when my hand is not behind it, because iPads are not always laying down on a table where the high frequency would be reflected up. So you're not going to hear the proper sound, not accurate on an iPad, but you want it to sound good on an iPad. So I want everything to sound good on all the platforms that are typically used by people. And I think those four, and then I also listen to it on my iMacs. I've got two of them. Both my iMacs are now in the studio here, as you can see there behind me. But that's because I'm now using, this is another update, the fact that I've now adopted my new Mac Mini. M1 Mac Mini is now my main daily computer, and I'm using it with two monitors, 32-inch monitors, in my daily room that I work, in which I work. I've ordered another. I've just ordered a new laptop too. I've ordered the M1 Max 16-inch MacBook Pro, and that's really exciting. So I'll be praying for that to be arriving in a good situation, everything timing-wise, and also in condition and everything, in good condition. I'll be praying for the delivery people and all of that, but it's not scheduled to arrive until December. So it's fast approaching December now. But they had a backlog of orders, I think. A lot of people are ordering these new M1 Max, M1 Pro. The M1 Pro and M1 Max just came out after the M1s. a year. Yeah, it's about a year, almost a year after. October 18th, these new ones came out. But last year in 2020, it was in the fall that I don't know the date because I didn't order one, but I ordered it in August. This August, I ordered an M1 Mac Mini, and that's now my main computer. I can't say more about any of that stuff because that has to be. I have no money now because I've ordered that, so I have to. That new laptop is going to be my main. It might be my main computer. I'm not sure yet. It might be. It should be because it's way more powerful, far more powerful than the M1 is. I mean, even though it's just far more powerful in how many monitors it can support, which is 4 instead of 2. But it's more powerful in many ways, but it's not. It's also a laptop, which is more versatile, more portable. But it's going to be. It's more powerful because it has a screen and very high quality audio system, but a very, very excellent screen in these devices, providing it's a good one that is manufactured to the best possible standard and arrives in excellent condition, and Jehovah willing, in other words, because there's a lot of variables. If Jehovah's willing, it's going to be a very, very much more powerful system than anything I've ever had, laptop or even desktop. And it's going to be low. It's low power. It's a very low power system, just like the Mac Mini. It's a very low power system, like 30, 40 watts at the most. It's what it produces or uses. I mean, so and it performs all of its high quality, high speed operations at this same low wattage. It doesn't require a ton of power. There's no. It can do it. It can do it on battery power. That's what I'm saying. These Macs can work at their optimum performance even on battery power. They don't. Every other system that's not a Mac can't perform at its full speed when it's not connected to power or when it's on battery. When they're on battery, they go down to like 1/10 of their speed or 1/4 of their speed or something ridiculously low, much lower, and much. Even though they're much more powerful than the Mac when they're connected to the Mac M1, for example, the one I have right now, even though these devices are more powerful when they're at full power plugged into the wall, when they're not plugged in, they drop to being about the same as my M1 in terms of how much power they're using, but in terms of performance. Well, I'm not even saying that's not even true. I misspoke. They're the same performance, maybe a little bit above, as the M1. But now my M1's always plugged into the wall. But when you unplug these devices, when they're not, and when you have an M1 that is a laptop that has a battery, if you compare the unplugged laptop, the performance of these other laptops that are almost or just about the same performance when they're plugged in as the M1 is when it's not plugged in, and there might be a little better, but when you unplug them, they become like one quarter as fast or something really ridiculously slow compared to the M1. So all the Macs are like this. The new ones are just like that as well. They perform at incredible speed, even they don't change when they're unplugged, when they're running on battery. And because they use very little power as well, they also have batteries that last much longer than any other systems too, currently available. But, whether that will continue, it looks like it will probably keep on going in that direction as Apple learns to manufacture their own silicon better and better. It could improve. It could keep on going in that direction where Apple can keep on producing devices that are just leagues ahead of these other devices that are not Apple. There's AMD and there's Intel. There's other manufacturers of silicon, and silicon is the basis for semiconductors. It's the thing in which all the impurities are put that are used to make transistors. The impurities are what allow the manufacture of these semiconductor devices. There's P-type and N-type and I studied that as my master's thesis. I studied semiconductors as my master's in physics. My thesis for that was based on semiconductor implant profiles and, excuse me, the doping of semiconductors is one very valuable process. They can dope by diffusion, but they can also use ion implantation, which was the basis of my thesis, was studying ion implantation in semiconductors. But they're using these processes in manufacturing smaller and smaller circuitry. And as the circuitry gets smaller, the time taken to travel for the electrical signals between the transistors is shorter and shorter, so they can run it. Well, they can't run any faster, is the truth, and the reason why is because they're already at the limit in terms of the RC time constants, where resistance times capacitance is a number, and that number it's 1 over RC. Time over RC is what it really is. But time divided by RC is what determines how fast the signal can rise and how fast it can fall. The RC time constant is the thing that determines how long it takes for it to get to a value of 1 over E or something like that. It's E to the T over RC, or E to the minus T over RC, something like that. Whatever it is, it's a time constant dependent on this RC product of R times C. So as the circuits get smaller and thinner, as a wire gets thinner, well, we know if we have a giant, thick piece of metal, and you can get a shock from it, and you can easily conduct a lot of current through it without getting any heat from it, right? Things get hot when they're small, and a lot of current is going through a very small conductor. If it's a big conductor, it doesn't get hot. That's why you need thicker wires for more power. So we know that resistance goes up when the wire goes down, and I squared R, current squared times resistance, is the power, and that's what's going to make heat. So the bigger the resistance, the more heat. So when something gets hot, it's because it's higher resistance. And these narrower wires get hot because they're higher resistance. Just like a water pipe that's smaller, it's going to be more resistant. It's going to be more resistance to trying to force water through it. So these smaller wires are higher R, but because a capacitor is a plate that stores charge, or any wire can store charge. If it's near another wire, the charges can interact between the wires. That's also capacitance. But the capacitance of a system, because it's a plate that stores charge, that's the theory. That's the simple case of a capacitor. A big plate can store a lot of charge, so capacitors are typically thought of as plates. They might be wound in a roll where the two plates are separated by an insulator, and then that's wrapped in a cylinder shape in a roll, but that's still the idea of two plates which store charge, and the plates might be wrapped around something, but they're still, there's an insulator between them to prevent the charge from flowing, but they induce charge on the other opposite plate. That's what a capacitor does. But our resistance has, we just said, got greater through the smaller wire, but we've made the plates smaller because we're going into smaller circuits, so everything is smaller, including the wires. So because smaller wires means higher resistance, but smaller plates and capacitors, smaller capacitors means smaller capacitance because it's how much charge can actually be stored there. So we have larger R and smaller C capacitance, smaller. So R times C is basically the same, it doesn't change. So that's why all of these smaller technology computers, the newer ones, they still run at the same gigahertz as the older ones. They haven't been able to increase that yet because R times C, R might be getting a lot bigger, C might be getting a lot smaller, but R times C is still staying about the same, is still the same. So the RC time constant, that's the thing that forces that or causes that computer to run at that maximum of 3 gigahertz, whatever it is. Something like 3 gigahertz is the maximum they've been able to achieve. And it didn't change over the past 10 years. That's because of this RC time constant. At least that's my firm, obvious, seems obvious to me as a physicist and an engineer and a person who studied, well, I studied electronics, but I also, as an engineer, but I also studied ion implantation in semiconductors. So I studied and thought about this somewhat, about what happens with transistors, how they work, But transistors, irrelevant how a transistor works, we're just talking about resistance and capacitance here. That's all we need to know. That has nothing to do with transistors per se. I mean, it's true of all electrical circuits, no matter what they're containing. Like before the era of transistors, there was still RC time constants. So RC time constants. So what makes these things go faster is because everything is smaller. So when you have to transfer a signal from the processor, right, over to the GPU or some other thing, they're so small that they're closer together. So the time it takes to go from that point A to point B is less, because these signals travel. Well, they travel pretty fast. Might be some significant fraction of the speed of light, like I don't know. We used to say like something like 0.6 or half the speed of light, and a current can flow in a wire. Something like half the speed of light, but it's just a rough approximation. It's never going to achieve the speed of light. At least that's what we believed. That's what we believe now. But maybe they can, but they haven't done it. So let's say all these little things are flowing around at near the speed of light, or something around half the speed of light. So the smaller we can make it, it doesn't seem like we're going to save all that much time, right? But if it's going at 3 gigahertz, then that 3 gigahertz is not going to be helped by that eliminating delay like that, because the 3 gigahertz is still limited by the RC time constant. But if you're if you're just transferring a signal from point A to point B, if that's happening, that can be certainly sped up by having the distance between them get smaller. But the other thing is, you can increase, of course, by having everything smaller, you can increase power by having multiple cores. So they do it by having multiple cores, and that's how they increase the speed. But if you ever had to have a signal, right, there's not going to be there won't be any delays introduced by resistance of a wire being too long. That's the thing. So that resistance is going to be, you have 1 over RC. That's your RC time constant. So the larger R and C are, how does that work? Let's see. Minus 1 over RC, minus T over RC. Minus means 1 over. But for an exponent, I'm trying to think. Now that part, let's see, large capacitance, yeah, you want smaller resistance, because that's what's going to make it take a lot less time for it to do. So if you can get smaller resistance somehow, right, or you can reduce this RC time constant. So smaller resistance closer together there's no resistance of the length of a wire, like a long wire connecting something. If it was very thin, it would be more resistance, and that's a greater RC time constant. So you're increasing the product of R times C, no matter what the capacitance is. Hopefully, in that case, you'd try to keep the capacitance as low as possible on that wire by not having that wire near to anything else to have any capacitance. But we could talk about this for days. That's the kind of thing it is. That's how they design things. They talk about things for days, and they come up with the ideas. But reducing resistance is going to reduce the RC time constant, therefore it's going to make things faster. So things closer together is faster, but they build multi-cores. Because it's smaller, they can put more cores on a chip. Apple Silicon is building multi-core devices, and so is everyone else. Intel and AMD, I haven't even seen the AMD, so I don't know what they're doing. But I'm sure they must be building multi-cores as well. Well, there's the Ryzen. I'm trying to remember what they said about the cores for that, but I think I heard that word somewhere. But you've got all these all these new chips are coming out with multi-core technology. That's the way of the future. And then they're going to try to build chips and connect them together using some kind of infinity fabric where you can connect more than one M1 chip or more than one M1 Pro chip or more than one M1 Max chip together on the same circuit board or in the same infinity fabric, so that they can transfer their data very quickly between them. They can communicate together. So it's a modular design is what they're trying to come up with now. Or if they're not, they should be. The reason being, if you could do it all on one wafer of silicon, which is the silicon wafers they build all this circuitry on, usually they get multiple processors from one wafer. The wafers might be, I don't know how big they are, but I've seen 7-inch ones or 5-inch ones, but they're 10-inch and bigger. They probably have bigger than 10-inch wafers, maybe 12-inch. I forget the sizes. But these silicon wafers are used to, whatever they're doing, to implant the impurities all over the place, but in a very accurate fashion. And maybe they're implanting, maybe they're using diffusion. They would use diffusion to get a basic overall impurity concentration on the whole wafer. But the silicon wafers are used to manufacture, but probably by ion implantation, I imagine, whatever they can do that's accurate. So they can, well, they also use masks. And then they can have a mask which has a narrow slit, and they can implant things through that slit to be a very narrow slit, right, and a very collimated beam would enable the accurate placement of these impurities on, nanometer type accuracy we're talking about. They're using 5 nanometers technology for the Apple technology. Right now, the Apple Silicon is built by Taiwan Semiconductor company, manufacturing company. Is that what it is? TSMC or TS? Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, I think it is, but something like that. Apple is using Taiwan, a company in Taiwan, to do their manufacturing for them now. So China has now achieved supremacy in the world because Apple are the best, the most advanced computers in the world technologically at the moment. And it's always, they're always trying to, the other companies are trying to compete with each other, of course. Everyone's trying to compete with each other as far as technological advancement. I better stop. Look, I'm at 1:37. I've got to stop. But this is how these things are going right now. Apple is doing some pretty unbelievable things because they're able to manufacture their own semiconductor chips now, their own silicon, which is the heart, the guts, and the heart, the soul, the heart of the computer. That they're able to build their own computers because they started with the iPhones, building their own chips. They were doing it with the iPhones until they got enough experience to then launch their new M1 Mac, for which they used their own Apple Silicon. And the only problem right now is, well, they're now coming out with the iOS programs too, that you can actually run any iOS program that can be run on an iPhone or on an iPad. Any of the iOS programs that Apple provided for their mobile devices can now be run on an M1 Mac. It's just the question has been up till now. The problem has been, I've been looking away from the camera, sorry about that. The problem with that we've had is that the people who make the software haven't yet authorized the use of the iOS programs on Apple Macs and on the M1 Macs, and the reason why, these programs won't run on any other Apple Macs, just on the Apple Silicon Macs or the M1s or the new M1s too. But the fact that they do run, even if they do run, the reason why the software, they all will run, but they don't have all the features that they have on the mobile devices. Like they might have a smaller window, and you can't read the text in the application because it's too small or something like that. That's the problem that they're going to have to cope with and fix on these apps, so that these iOS apps will be compatible with Macintosh by Apple. But Apple won't be able to do that because these are all programs written by other developers. Apple can do that with their own apps, of course, whatever apps they produce. But these other companies, it's up to them whether they are going to make these things compatible and fully functional in the Apple Macintosh environment. And that's one of the great advantages, though, and I'm already using some of my apps. They just became available. My Bible program and which is the JW library, and my garbage collection program, both of those I'm running on. I was running them in an emulator, and now I'm running them on. Well, I'm not going to go into all that, but now I'm running them directly on iOS. I downloaded the iOS version, which just became available. Just the other day, I noticed they were available, so I've been looking for them and waiting for them to become available. They're not perfect yet, but at least I'm running them. I can't increase and scale the size. I'm going to stop. It's 1:40. I'm going to forget what day it is, but because I've talked so long, it's November 24th, 2021, and this is Ward Green, and this has been fun.